Tekrar günaydınlar. Efendim ismim Artunç Kocabalkan. Bugünkü sabah bölümünde toplantının akışı konusunda yardımcı olmaya, destek olmaya devam edeceğim. Öncelikle Türkiye'de önümüzdeki günlerde düzenlenecek G20 toplantıları öncesinde UN SDSN Türkiye ağı tarafından SDSN Global Başkanı ve Kolombiya Üniversitesi Earth Institute Direktörü Profesör Doktor Jeffrey Sachs'ın katılımıyla düzenlenecek 17 küresel sürdürülebilir kalkınma hedefinin tanıtılacağı ve sürdürülebilir kalkınma gündeminin G20 ekonomilerine etkilerinin tartışılacağı SDSN20 konferansına hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Çok kısaca Türkiye'de ben 13 sene CNBC'de çalıştım. CNBC'de kurumsal yönetim, sürdürülebilirlik gibi konulara hep önem verdik ama az reyting aldık. Ne zaman ki sürdürülebilir, sustainability değil de survive etmeye yönelik bir şeyler anlattık, çok reyting aldık. Ama biliyorum ki doğrusu sürdürülebilirlik ve başarıya ulaşmak için bu seçkin katılımın çok daha büyük reytingler alması ve bunu tabana yayması lazım. Umuyorum ki bu toplantı buna bir vesile olacak. Sözü fazla uzatmayayım. Açılışı yapmak üzere Rektör Yardımcısı Profesör Doktor Lale Akarun'u sahneye davet ediyorum.
Değerli konuklar, hoş geldiniz. Sizi Boğaziçi Üniversitesi adına hoş geldiniz derim. Boğaziçi Üniversitesi 150 yılını devirmiş bir üniversite. İlk 100 yılını Robert Koleji olarak İstanbul'un ve bu bölgenin en iyi eğitim kurumlarından bir tanesi olarak tamamladıktan sonra son 40-50 yılda önemli bir değişim gerçekleştirdi. 1978 yılında bir kamu üniversitesine dönüşümünü tamamladıktan sonra büyümeye ve lisansüstü programlarını geliştirmeye başladı. Bu adımlardan önemli bir tanesi 1983 yılında Çevre Bilimleri Enstitüsü'nün açılmasıdır. İlerleyen yıllarda da araştırmaya verdiği önemi artırarak sürdürdü. İlk seçilmiş rektörümüz olan ve UN SDSN Türkiye Onursal Başkanı Profesör Doktor Üstün Ergüder liderliğinde stratejik planına bir araştırma üniversitesi olma hedefini koydu. Ondan sonra da düzenli olarak bu hedefe uygun olarak gelişti. Şimdi UN SDSN hedeflerine baktığım zaman, sürdürülebilirlik hedeflerine baktığım zaman araştırma programımızda bu hedeflere yönelik pek çok adım atmış olduğumuzu, pek çok merkez ve laboratuvar kurmuş olduğumuzu görüyorum. 2007'de kurulan Sürdürülebilir Kalkınma ve Temiz Üretim Merkezi, disiplinler arası bir yaklaşımla üniversitemizin çeşitli bölümlerinden akademisyenleri ve ayrıca konusunda uzman diğer paydaşları bir araya getirmektedir. Merkez bünyesinde sürdürülebilir üretim ve tüketim yaklaşımları ile sektörel, bölgesel uygulamalı araştırma geliştirme çalışmalarını gerçekleştirmektedir. 2013'te kurulan İklim Değişikliği ve Politikaları Merkezi bu konuların içinde yaşadığımız coğrafyaya ve Doğu Akdeniz, Orta Doğu ve Orta Asya başta olmak üzere komşu ülkelere etkileri konusunda disiplinler arası araştırma yürütüyor. Enerji Politikaları Merkezi, enerjinin verimli, akılcı, temiz, ucuz, güvenilir üretimi, iletimi, dağıtımı ve tüketimi ile ilgili araştırma, teknoloji ve politikalar geliştirme hedefiyle kuruldu. Bunun dışında bu hedeflere yönelik çalışan pek çok sosyal merkezimiz de var. Sosyal Politika Forumu, Barış Eğitimi Merkezi bunlardan birkaçı. Üniversitemizde 3 yıl önce kurulan Teknoloji Transfer Ofisi ise üniversitede üretilen araştırma ve tecrübenin dış paydaşlara aktarılması konusunda bir köprü görevi görüyor. Yeşil kampüs olmak uzun süredir Boğaziçi Üniversitesi'nin stratejik planının ana eksenlerinden bir tanesi. Yeşil Kampüs Komisyonumuz bu doğrultuda adımları planlıyor ve uygulanmasını izliyor. Boğaziçi Üniversitesi 2014 yılında Kilyos kampüsünde kurulan rüzgar enerji santrali ile kendi enerjisini yenilenebilir kaynaklardan üreten kampüs oldu. Kampüste kurulmakta olan laboratuvarlarla dalga enerjisi, biyoenerji ve diğer yenilenebilir ve sürdürülebilir enerji alanında altyapılar kuruldu, kurulmaya devam ediliyor. Bu kampüsümüz bu konuda bir merkez haline gelecek. Bildiğiniz gibi 2012'de kurulan SDSN, Columbia Üniversitesi Yer Bilimleri Enstitüsü Müdürü Profesör Jeffrey Sachs tarafından yönetilmekte. Üniversitemizin Columbia Üniversitesi ile uzun soluklu çok boyutlu ilişkileri var. İstanbul'da Columbia Global Center'ın açılması ile bu ilişkiler daha da çeşitlendi ve derinleşti. 2014 yılında Boğaziçi Üniversitesi'nde Üstün Ergüder'in başkanlığında Cemil Arıkan Hoca'nın destekleri ve Nilgün Cılız ve Levent Kurnaz hocalarımızın eş başkanlığında kurulan SDSN Türkiye, akademisyenler, araştırma merkezleri, STK'lar, iş dünyası, kamu kurumları ve diğer paydaşları sizleri bir araya getirmek hedefiyle kuruldu. SDSN Boğaziçi Üniversitesi'nde ve Türkiye'de sürdürülebilir kalkınma hedeflerinin topluma ve karar vericilere duyurulması, bunlar hakkında yerel bilimsel araştırmalar yapılması, raporlar üretilmesi ve bunlar aracılığıyla bölgesel politikaların belirlenmesini amaçlıyor. Bu iddialı hedefler için Türkiye ve bölgedeki üniversiteler, sivil toplum kuruluşları ve diğer paydaşlarıyla bir ağ düzeninde çalışmalıyız. Bu konferansın sürdürülebilirlik hedeflerine yönelik araştırmaların sonuçlarının tartışılması ve paylaşılması için verimli bir platform olmasını dilerim.
Efendim, açılış konuşmasını yapmak üzere Birleşmiş Milletler Sürdürülebilir Kalkınma Çözümleri Ağı Türkiye Liderlik Konseyi Başkanı ve Boğaziçi Üniversitesi eski rektörü Sayın Profesör Doktor Üstün Ergüder'i davet ediyorum.
Saygıdeğer ve sevgili katılımcılar, hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Bu salonu doldurmanız bizi çok mutlu ediyor. Konuşmama başlamadan evvel Lale'nin söylediği, rektör yardımcımız Lale'nin söylediği bu üniversitenin sürdürülebilirliğe verdiği önemi anlatan bir anekdotla anlatacağım. Şu yeşil sahayı görüyorsunuz. Burada suç benimdir. Orası yapıldı yeşil saha. Fakat orada ne gibi bir sistem kurulduğunu şu anda hiç duyurmadığımızı düşünüyorum. Çünkü o yeşil saha hem yağmur suyunu hem oraya sulamak için kullanılan suyu toplayıp aşağıda bir depoya aktarıp o depodan tekrar recycle etme şeyine sahip. Bu da imkanına sahip. Bu yapıldı fakat hiç duyurulmadı. Bence yeşil kampüs olma yolunda da çok önemli bir yoldur. Çünkü bu orta saha 1991 yılında bir çamur deryasıydı. Ve futbol oynanırdı. Şimdi bir sosyal alan haline geldi ve onun da o şekilde idame ettirilmesi daha 92 senesinde yapılan bir sistemle sürdürülebilirliğe bir katkı oldu. Yeşil kampüs kavramına bir katkı oldu diye düşünüyorum. Ben 2015 senesinin süre gelen önemli gündeminde bizler dünyayı daha kapsayıcı, sürdürülebilir ve güçlü bir kalkınma rotasına sokmak için bu sene daha önce hiç görmediğimiz bir fırsata sahibiz. Bugüne kadar hep konuştuk, konferanslar tertipledik, tartıştık, araştırmalar yaptık, konuyu her yönüyle irdeledik. Ne güzel araştırmalar, ne güzel toplantılar dedik. Ondan sonra dağılıp gittik, gündelik işlerimizi yapmaya başladık. Ancak sürdürülebilir kalkınma konusunda sonuç alıcı, hayatımızı etkileyecek ne yaptık derseniz cevabım pek olumlu değil. Hem kurumlar açısından hem kişiler açısından. Bu söylediklerimin Türkiye için geçerli olduğunu düşünüyorum. Hem küresel hem de ülkeler bazında durumun pek değişik olduğunu sanmıyorum. Tabii burada haksızlık etmemek lazım. Bazı ülkeler diğerlerinden bu konuda biraz daha ileriler. Ancak bu yeterli mi? Çünkü dünya hepimizin ve sorun küresel. Hepimiz burada kirletilen hava komşu ülkeleri de etkileyebiliyor. Onun için ülkeler arası işbirliğini çok gerekli. Kokladığımız hava, içtiğimiz su, hoyratça tükettiğimiz kaynaklar hepimizin sorunu. Bu sorunları çözmek ancak küresel işbirliğiyle olur. 2015 yılı bu nedenle özellikle Türkiye için çok iyi bir fırsat. Hepimiz için çok iyi bir fırsat ama Türkiye için çok daha iyi bir fırsat. Birkaç gün sonra Antalya'da başlayacak olan G20 toplantılarının en önemli 3 ayağından biri Buttressing Sustainability başlığı, yani sürdürülebilirliği güçlendirmek. Küresel ekonomiyi sürdürülebilir kılmak, kalkınma, enerji ve iklim değişikliğinin finansmanı masa üstüne yatırılacak bu başlık altında. Konuştuklarımızı, tartıştıklarımızı, edindiğimiz bilgileri hayata geçirmek için çok iyi bir fırsat var önümüzde. Yoksulluğu ortadan kaldırabilir, herkes için refah içinde hayatlarını sürdürülebilmesini sağlayabiliriz. Eşit ve onurlu bir dünyaya rehberlik edebiliriz. Bu önemli fırsatı gerçeğe dönüştürmek, bizlerin bu konuda ne kadar ısrarcı, odaklı ve işbirliği içerisinde olacağımıza bağlı. SDSN Türkiye olarak biz, küresel SDSN'nin tespit edip hedeflere doğru el birliğiyle yürümekte kararlıyız. Bu amaçla Boğaziçi Üniversitesi'nin ev sahipliğinde üniversiteler arasında işbirliğini sağlamak ve ekonomimizin değişik sektörleriyle köprüler oluşturmaya var gücümüzle çalışıyoruz. Ancak bu şekilde bilim ve uygulamayı bir araya getirip ülkemizdeki toplumsal farkındalığı arttırıp sürdürülebilirlik sorunlarını masaya yatırmak istiyoruz. Pek tabii ki bu bağlamda küresel SDSN çerçevesinde diğer ülkelerin deneyimleri bizim için çok çok önemli. Onların deneyimlerini duymak, o deneyimlerden faydalanmak istiyoruz. SDSN olarak bu amaçla bugün İstanbul'da toplanmış bulunuyoruz. Hepinizin bildiği gibi tüm akademi, sivil toplum ve özel sektörün ilmi ve teknik uzmanlığını bir araya getirerek sürdürülebilir kalkınmaya yerel, bölgesel ve küresel seviyede destek vermemiz hedefimiz. Artık kendi kişisel gündemlerimizi aşıp işbirliği yapmaya mahkumuz. Dünyayı ancak birlikte öğrenmeyi hızlandırarak, birbirimizden öğrenerek, yapılan çalışmaları bütünsel hale getirerek daha iyi bir yer yapabiliriz. Önümüzdeki sürede ancak böyle ekonomik, sosyal ve çevresel zorlukları aşabiliriz. Bu amaçla çok önemli gündem maddelerimiz var önümüzde. Bugün sizlerle G20 ülkelerinde sürdürülebilir kalkınma hedeflerini nasıl uygulamamız gerektiğini, süreçlerin ve finansmanın bu doğrultuda nasıl yapılandırılmasını, hangi öncelikler ile bu hedeflerin G20'de uygulanması gerekliliğini ve özel sektörün SDSN'in hedeflerinin de uygulanmasındaki rollerini konuşuyor olacağız. Farklı örneklere bakacağız, tecrübe, öneri ve seslere yer vereceğiz. Bu süreçte dikkatimizi gençlere çevirip bizden sonraki kuşakların sürdürülebilirlik konusunda nasıl daha bilinçli olurlar konusu üzerinde duracağız. Bu konuda SDSN önemli adımlar atmış durumda. Boğaziçi Üniversitesi'nde de başlatılan Youth Initiative bu yönde Türkiye'de atılmış önemli bir adım. Bu konuda Nilgün Cılız hocamızın liderliği için kendisine ayrıca çok teşekkür ederim. Üniversitelerimizde sürdürülebilirlik çerçevesinde başlatılan Mass Online Courses, yani Türkçe'de, İngilizce MOOC deniyor, Türkçe'de de kitlesel açık çevrim içi dersler. Bunu güzel olmuyor her neyse, MOOC'un karşılığı olarak. Gençlere verilecek eğitimin yanında onları dünyayla eklemlendirme potansiyeline sahip. Çok değerli katılımcılar, her birinizin katılım ve destekleri önümüzdeki hedeflerin etkili bir şekilde sahiplenebilmesi ve uygulanabilmesi için çok çok önemli. Sizlere bugün burada bulunduğunuz ve katılımınızla bizi yüreklendirdiğiniz için çok teşekkür ederiz. Ayrıca Sayın Rektör Yardımcımıza da çok teşekkür ederim. Üniversitenin, bu güzel üniversitenin, bu güzel tesisleri bize tahsis ettiler. Ev sahipliği için Boğaziçi Üniversitesi'ne de ayrıca teşekkür ederim. Huzurunuzda bu konferansın hazırlanmasında desteklerini esirgemeyen Cemil Arıkan Başkanlığındaki SDSN20 Yönetim Kurulu'na, ev sahibimiz Boğaziçi Üniversitesi ve Rektörlüğü'ne, eş başkanlarımız Levent Kurnaz ve Nilgün Cılız hocalarımıza teşekkürü bir borç bilirim. Bu toplantının başarılı olmasında belki de en büyük pay siperlerde savaşanlarındır. Geceyi gündüze katarak fedakarca çalışan koordinatörümüz Bahar Özay'a içtenlikle teşekkür ederim. Bahar, bir ayağa kalk da görsün herkes seni. Ayaktasın. Bahar, çok teşekkürler, minnettarız. Bahar'ın yönetim ve denetiminde en ufak ayrıntıya kadar ilgilenen, koşuşturan, çözüm üreten, fedakarca çalışan, gönüllü çalışan, fedakarca ve gönüllü çalışan SDSN ekibi mensupları, değişik üniversitelerin öğrencileri, Çağla Fadıllıoğlu. Burada mısın Çağla? Ayağa kalk. Batuhan Görgülü, Burkay Göknar, Aslı Mercan ve Ezgi Memiş. Çocuklar, hepinize çok çok teşekkür ederiz. Hepimiz adına sizlere minnettarız. Sizlere gayet güzel bir konferans dilerim. Teşekkür ederim.
Efendim şimdi ilk oturuma geçeceğiz. G20 ülkelerinde sürdürülebilir kalkınma hedeflerinin uygulanması hareket planı başlıklı ilk panelimiz bu. Bu arada YouTube'da eğer search ederseniz SDSN olarak 3. sırada canlı yayın olarak da bu toplantının verildiğini göreceksiniz. Bu teknoloji içinde ben Sayın Rektörüm zaten teşekkür etti ama arkadaşlarıma bir kere daha teşekkür ediyorum. Medyaya da bunun iz düşümünü yaptıkları için. Efendim ilk panel için İktisadi İşbirliği ve Gelişme Teşkilatı OECD Türkiye Daimi Temsilcisi Büyükelçi Sayın Mithat Rende'yi, SDSN Global Başkanı Profesör Jeffrey Sachs'ı ve SDSN Global Eş Başkanı ve Indian Institute İnsan Yerleşimleri Direktörü Aromar Revi'yi masaya davet ediyorum. Buyursunlar efendim.
My, oh my. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jeff Sachs, Director of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. And I'm told that I'm chairing this session, so I am very pleased to do that. And I think I'll start by making a short presentation of where we stand in the Sustainable Development Goals, and also why it's so important and why we're so grateful for SDSN Turkey and Boğaziçi University and all of the partner universities of SDSN Turkey to be hosting all of us coming from around the world today, just on the eve of the G20. So I think I'll stand up and make a short presentation. PC translation. There we go. The problem is I sent this from a Mac, and so we're having problems of Mac PC cooperation. This is my fault because the PowerPoint came from a Mac and it's trying to find a home on a PC. So this is the issue. No? That's a step forward. Good. We're very excited today that we're not only convening a worldwide network, but we're doing it on the eve of the G20. And so first, congratulations to Turkey for hosting the G20. This is a very important meeting coming up. A lot of problems, a lot of issues, and also, aside from all of the normal issues of the G20, it is a meeting on the eve of the climate change conference, which now is less than 3 weeks away, and is probably the most important test that the SDGs will face. Certainly, it's the first test of the Sustainable Development Goals in their infancy. So this is an extremely important meeting, and I'm very grateful that the Sustainable Development Solutions Network is able to convene what we hope will be an annual SDSN20. In other words, universities from the G20 countries meeting every year on the eve of the G20 so that our network can really have its full input and I hope impact on moving forward the Sustainable Development Goals. So count on us that we will look back, all of us. This is a historic start, I hope, to a very important tradition. And what a wonderful place to have that start, Boğaziçi University. I like to think that the world has entered an age of sustainable development by adopting the Sustainable Development Goals just about 7 weeks ago. On September 25th at the UN, all 193 member states of the United Nations, by acclamation, adopted the new 17 Sustainable Development Goals. We had launched the SDSN as a global network back in 2012 in anticipation of these goals. In 2012, there was the 20th anniversary conference of the Earth Summit. And that 20th anniversary conference took place in Rio in the same way that the Earth Summit did. But unlike the Earth Summit, it was a somewhat grim occasion because the main conclusion of the anniversary was that the Earth Summit treaties on climate change, on biodiversity, and on stopping the spread of deserts had not succeeded. 20 years on, 3 big treaties had not yet been implemented. And the most important outcome of that Rio +20 anniversary was the intention to launch global goals with the idea that if there could be clear goals stated for the world around the theme of sustainable development, this could give an added new impetus to the basic concept of sustainable development as a worldwide need and could give a new political force as well as organizational force to achieve sustainable development. And we know the outcome. 3 years of negotiation were successfully concluded, which is not to be taken for granted these days. So in June 2012, the government said we'll negotiate by September 2015 new sustainable development goals. And for a change, the UN actually completed its work a month early, because in August 2015, the gavel went down and the governments agreed on 17 sustainable development goals. And they agreed to make sustainable development as a concept the centerpiece for global cooperation on economic development for the next 15 years. They set an agenda for the period up to 2030. And technically, that agenda starts on January 1, 2016. So the goals have been set, and the clock starts at the beginning of the coming year. But of course, all over the world, it really is the case already that governments are beginning to have a look, and certainly with the nudging of all of us, universities around the world are starting to have a look at what are the agreed global objectives. The key of sustainable development is that it is a concept to combine 3 objectives of our societies and the world as a whole. One objective is continued economic development, including the end of extreme poverty, which is actually SDG number 1. The second objective is social inclusion, which means that in our societies, and all of our societies are divided. They're divided by gender, unfortunately. They're divided by ethnicity. And none of our societies is very good at handling this. But the second pillar of sustainable development is social inclusion. Societies of human rights, of gender equality, of ending discrimination against various groups in the society, of reducing violence internally within the societies. So SDG 5 is calling for gender equality. SDG 10 is calling for reduced inequalities within societies and across societies. And SDG 16 is calling for peaceful and inclusive societies, all under this second pillar. I assume everybody here knows all 17 by heart. If you don't, by the end of the session, I hope you will. This is really part of our responsibility. So The third pillar, of course, is environmental sustainability. And that is that we finally figure out and commit ourselves to combining economic development with technologies, behaviors, and systems so that that economic development does not wreck the planet. And mostly the goals from 11 onward are about the environmental sustainability principally. SDG 11 is for sustainable cities, sustainable human settlements. SDG 12 is for the so-called circular economy or sustainable consumption and production patterns so that waste management and industrial effluents are addressed. SDG 13 is to stop human-induced climate change. And the asterisk on SDG 13 is to reach a strong agreement in Paris at COP21, which starts on November 30th, concludes December 10, and really is our last chance to find a path to climate safety. It's even too late for total climate safety, we know, but to avoid climate catastrophe, if I could put it that way. SDG 14 is for ocean health and conservation of marine ecosystems, and SDG 15 is for the conservation of terrestrial ecosystems. It's a lot of goals. I was hoping during the negotiations that we would get it down to 10. It would have been a little bit easier to remember, but the governments did a good job, actually, to get this list because these are substantial objectives. They're meaningful. They're ones that we can feel are important to mobilize around, to work towards, to identify pathways for. I don't think there's anything wasted here. We said many times over the 3 years of negotiation that with a few commas, you could put a few of these together and get the number down a little bit. But 17, it turns out, it's possible to remember. It's possible to organize around, and we have these beautiful charts to help us to do it. And I think that we are now in a position to embrace these objectives, understand them, and help to move forward. If we package them a little bit better, let me just mention a few of what I regard as the thematic high points. First is the world is still following up on the Millennium Development Goals, which were in place from 2000 until now to fight extreme poverty, but this time with the presumption that we can end extreme poverty at the end of the SDG period by 2030. So the headline goal is to end extreme poverty. But goals number 1, 2, 6, and 7, 6 being for water and sanitation, 7 being for universal access to energy services, and goal number 2, to end hunger, that package is a continuation of the Millennium Development Goals. A second huge theme, of course, is to decarbonize the energy system. This is the single overriding step of addressing climate change. And for the first time, our governments are really using the language of decarbonizing the energy system. And this was important in the G7 communique earlier this summer, and I hope that the G20 will also be very clear on this point, that this is the essence of what needs to be agreed in Paris. And for us as a network, it's one of the biggest challenges analytically. How can Turkey, for example, move to an energy system that is essentially low carbon by mid-century and zero carbon around 2070 or 2080, which is the indicated pathway that the world needs to follow in order to be able to stay below 2 degrees Celsius warming. And this year, by the way, for the first time in history, we're already at 1 degree warming. This is an extraordinarily warm year, of course, because it adds an El Nino on top of the long-term trends. So we're halfway to the 2 degree C upper limit or so-called guardrail. The third goal or broad overarching theme that is very important is to figure out how to make agriculture fully sustainable, because we still haven't accomplished the basic task of having an agriculture system worldwide that feeds the planet in a nutritious way and does so without undermining the physical environment. We face 3 huge problems with agriculture. First, there still is a lot of hunger. About 1 billion people suffering from outright insufficiency of caloric and protein intake. Another 1 billion at least suffering from important micronutrient deficiencies, possibly up to 2 billion more. Another problem that agriculture is a huge driver of environmental degradation. It's the #1 sector of greenhouse gas emissions, actually, because it not only emits carbon dioxide, but also methane and nitrous oxide. And it not only does it through energy use and chemical application, but also through deforestation. And it's the biggest water user in the world, of course. It is responsible for the nitrogen and phosphorus fluxes, which are causing so much pollution. It destroys habitat of other species. It's the #1 cause of invasive species. And the third major problem is it's the #1 sector that's vulnerable to climate change. So you add it up, the idea of food security remains, even in the 21st century, an extraordinarily difficult scientific, social, and economic challenge. And this is all summarized in SDGs 2, 14, and 15, agriculture, hunger, and ecosystem conservation. We have a major theme of sustainable cities. I know that Aromar Revi will talk about that. He's really the leader of the SDSN network on this issue, and getting cities organized to think about these goals at the city or metropolitan level, not only at the national level, is a prime objective of the Sustainable Development Goals and of the SDSN as a network. Again, an industrial economy that is environmentally sustainable is another huge theme. Universal access to social services are SDGs 3 and 4, health and education. I'll show you one picture. I think that I included it, but it's in the wonderful report that you have received by the Bertelsmann Foundation. Is Christian here? Congratulations to Christian Kroll, who has done an absolutely superb job, thank you, of giving us an initial benchmark for the high-income countries in almost all of the G20. I don't know if it's all of them, but almost all of them, at least on the list. But you'll see that there are huge challenges of the quality of education at the primary and secondary level. And now that we're measuring what's actually being learned or what's not being learned, we find that it's more dramatic than we might have suspected. Of course, SDG 8 is a theme that is dear to the heart of any politician around the world, and that is decent jobs, especially for young people and especially in a rapidly changing world economy. And then, as I said earlier, the pillar of social inclusion, of gender, of human rights, of peaceful societies, of public-private partnerships, of global cooperation. And these are all great themes for not only social mobilization and governance, but for research, because not one of these is straightforward. It's not simply a matter of political will. It's a huge question: how can these goals be actually accomplished? The background for these goals is that there, I would say, is very good progress on one of the three pillars. The economic growth pillar, or the economic development pillar, while of course with a mixed record worldwide, has had a pretty good 15-year period. Poverty rates came down sharply in the world, and the headline of the Millennium Development Goals, which was to cut the poverty rate by half by this year compared to the rate in 1990, was much more than accomplished. So the World Bank keeps adjusting exactly its measures. The current measure of extreme poverty is now defined as living under $1.90 per person per day, measured in 2011 international dollars. And by that new metric, the poverty rate in the world was 37% in 1990, and it's now down to 9.6% today. So by the World Bank's measure, for the first time in human history, fewer than 1 in 10 in the world live below this poverty line. That's quite an accomplishment. And it's not a mirage, because there has been significant improvement in, especially, of course, in Asia, led by China, but also in sub-Saharan Africa, which is the epicenter of extreme poverty in the world. The poverty came down from around 58% in the year 2000, according to the World Bank's estimate, to around 37% in 2015. Real progress. One thing that is notable that has been found is that during this period, the most important predictor of the rate of economic growth has been a measure of the quality of education, actually, and I think that this is quite a telling point. A recent study by Hanushek and Wosman at Stanford used the data on the quality or on educational performance at the secondary level as an explanatory variable of cross-country economic growth. And you can see that the fit is really quite good. On the horizontal axis is the PISA test scores. The PISA test scores is the program of international scholastic comparisons run by the OECD. And on the vertical axis is the growth rate. And what they found is that while the years of schooling isn't such a good predictor of relative economic performance, the quality of the schooling is a very good predictor. And the really outstanding performance in the northeast corner of this graph are the East Asian countries. Not necessarily the richest, but they rank right at the top of the world's scores in science, math, and reading. Korea, Singapore, Taiwan. China doesn't do the entire country, but it tests Shanghai, and Shanghai scores #1 in the world in this comparison. And Japan and Vietnam, which is a quite poor country, but scores quite well. So something good's going on in East Asian education that the rest of us need to learn from. And the United States is somewhere in the middle of the pack. I don't see, Turkey is here, actually not far from, where's the United States? Here. These are conditional on other controlling variables, but Turkey and the United States are kind of in the middle of the pack, in the middle of the performance and here are the East Asian economies at the top of growth and the top of the educational performance. That's where the world economy has worked relatively well in growth. Where it has worked relatively badly is in social inclusion, and where it's worked disastrously is on the environment. So on social inclusion, there's a lot of inequality, and the inequality has been rising. And in the United States, for example, we've just had a blowout of rising inequality, illustrated here by the Gini coefficient of the United States. We've had 30 years of rapid increases of inequality, and we have the highest inequality ever recorded in modern US history, certainly for the last century. And this is consistent with lots of observations about rich-poor gaps in US society, but this is observed in many, many parts of the world. And even more dramatic, of course, has been the environmental failures. China got rich, and it also got very dirty and very polluted. I was in Beijing last week for 3 days, didn't see one bit of blue in the sky, just gray for 3 days. And it wasn't because of clouds, it was just pollution, continuous, nonstop pollution. And so this question of combining the economic development with the environmental sustainability remains the greatest unsolved challenge. And at the SDSN, we favor the perspective of the planetary boundaries idea, which has been put forward by dozens of world-leading ecologists, arguing that we can identify key boundary conditions for the effective functioning of our ecosystems and climate, and that we're at threat of or already in the process of violating those boundaries in many major areas. Most importantly, climate change, which is due north. But related to climate change, at 1 o'clock on this clock is ocean acidification, which is simply the fact that the high concentration of atmospheric carbon dioxide leads to a high concentration of dissolved CO2 in the ocean level, and that's already led to roughly a 30% increased acidity of the oceans, with a lot more to come. And going around this circle of planetary boundaries are the fluxes from chemical fertilizers, nitrogen and phosphorus, the depletion of fresh water sources, the loss of habitat, the chemical pollutants, the aerosol pollutants of the sort that one sees in China and India, in the air pollution, and so forth. And in essence, SDGs 13, 14, and 15 are to stay within the planetary boundaries. The most difficult of all of these, and the most urgent, is the decarbonization of an energy system that has developed over 200 years based on coal, oil, and gas. And we have, according to the standard of the 2 degrees Celsius, roughly a half century to go from a world economy in which 80% of the primary energy is fossil fuels to a world economy in which almost none of the primary energy is fossil fuels, because we have to get to zero net emissions to stabilize the greenhouse gas concentrations, and have to do that by around 2070. So this is a very tough problem, because there's such a long lead time in power plants, in transport infrastructure, and the building stock, that if we just continue for a few more years as business as usual, we will not be able to turn the curve, even afterwards, with hard work, except at enormous economic cost. And so Paris is the last chance to bend the emissions curve from what is taken to be business as usual, one of these top 2 curves, but roughly 3 degrees Celsius warming or higher, with some reasonable probability of 4 degrees Celsius or more warming by the end of the century, which are the top 2 scenarios of the IPCC, and to bend the curve down to this lower trajectory, which reaches 0 net emissions in 2070. And this is one of the most important parts for our network to be examining. Now, we can take a quick score, as Christian Kroll did in this report, of where countries stand on these Sustainable Development Goals. You know that the UN has said that it will make indicators to go along with the goals. It's a little bit of a mess, I would say, because while there are 17 goals, which is rather manageable, the UN also adopted 169 targets, which is completely unmanageable. And fortunately, they said every country needs to set its own targets using these global targets as guidelines, because 169 is too much. But in addition to the goals and targets, the UN will propose indicators by next March. And there may be 100 some indicators in the end. But Christian took 2 per goal, I think. Is that right? So 34 indicators, and came up with a quick SDG indicator, which I think is enormously useful, and as useful certainly as having 150 or 200 indicators. We really learned something from this. And what we learn is a little bit what we might know, but I'd say the news for the US and Turkey, my country and your country, isn't great from this first score. What we kind of would have guessed is that the countries that are really sustainable are the famed social democracies of Northern Europe. So it's always the same: Sweden, Norway, Denmark. And by the way, for good reason. They're wonderful societies, peaceful societies, high measure of equality, very prosperous, very green. And so they put all the pieces together and they show up at the top of the chart: Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, number 1 through 4, 4 Nordic countries. It's a little bit distressing for me that the United States, on a list of 34 countries, comes out 29th. But that is not wrong. That's really the fact that the US is quite good at one thing: it's rich. But it's quite bad at 2 things: being fair and being green. And this is what shows up in these indicators. US society is highly unequal. It performs quite badly on the social indicators. And it's got relatively clean air, actually, but a lot of carbon pollution. 17 tons of CO2 per person. So of any big economy, the most in the world. And the net result is to rank quite low. Turkey, of the OECD countries, ranks 33 out of 34. This is very useful as an indicator, in my view, because it gives a benchmark. What are the big challenges on a relative benchmarking basis? And I think that this is something, obviously, that we're going to be discussing in the meetings. I won't go through the rest of the graphs because you have them in front of you, so that is useful, but and also saving us time, because I've already vastly exceeded my time. But let me talk about, finally, the question of what do we do in the face of these goals? Because the idea of these goals is not that these are nice aspirations to be looked at and said, wouldn't it be nice? But of course, a work program. Ideally, these goals turn into a global work program. For universities, they turn into a research, education, and demonstration project program. For governments, they turn into a program of political responsibility. Whether they take hold in this way remains to be seen. It certainly is not clear. It's partly the responsibility of the G20 countries as the most important economies of the world to say we put these centrally in our thinking, planning, communiques, and our national actions. And for universities, it's our responsibility to say we put these centrally in our teaching, our research, and our work with society. So what does it mean to take these goals seriously? Very quickly. First, it means creating new tools of national planning, budgeting, technology road mapping to understand how these goals could be achieved. And a quintessential way to do this is one of our favorite projects of the SDSN, one of our favorite early projects, what we call the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project. And it is to ask the question, how could country X, the US or Turkey or Canada or China or India, decarbonize the energy system? What are the alternatives? Nuclear, wind, solar, what choices, what kind of pathway, what trajectory, what costs, what alternatives? And this I regard as one of the most important research activities that the SDSN Turkey or the SDSN in any part of the world should be undertaking. And the team of the Deep Decarbonization Pathways Project, the DDPP, is available to work together with national chapters to help design an analytical program of this work. And I think it's a great offer and something that I hope all parts of our network will take up. Of course, the second thing that we need to do is to form networks of the universities, the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, which is represented here with its Turkey chapter, civil society organizations, and government to say the SDGs are a complex, multi-stakeholder process, and we need complex convening across the scientific community, the business community, civil society, and government. It's a new kind of governance if we're going to do it. Our governments don't necessarily think this way or act this way, but I don't think the SDGs are going to be achieved other than through a multi-stakeholder process. And one of the major ideas of having a Sustainable Development Solutions Network is to convene these kinds of discussions. And by the way, convene them not only with national government, but with city governments, with the government of Istanbul, with the governments of cities around the rest of the country, with the universities in those regions for the brainstorming, because a lot of the work that needs to be done is subnational work. Third is rapid deployment of new technologies, especially information technologies, because that's our most powerful single tool that we have right now. What kinds of new technologies, new applications, smart grids, smart systems can be deployed for meeting these goals and for measurement, for monitoring, for remote sensing? So there's a lot of great work to be done in deploying cutting-edge technologies for the Sustainable Development Goals. Another area, of course, is public awareness and public education and citizens' engagement, because it's pretty clear that these goals cannot be met except through an active involvement of the public. Because one of the things that's happening all over the world is that even when there are good ideas about what to do and good technologies, if the public doesn't accept that, it's not going to happen. And so without public engagement, we're not going to make it. So just to say our network continues to grow. It continues to expand now to around, we estimate more than 300, I don't have the most recent count, but Maria would. About 350 member universities. We have a new partnership started with UN Academic Impact, which is a network that was established for establishing norms of global citizenship through university education that will greatly increase the membership of the SDSN. And I'm delighted that here today, not only do we have SDSN Turkey, which is, of course, vibrant, and we're grateful and thrilled for your work. We also have representatives of networks from around the world and from the Global Secretariat. And so in our discussions coming up, I am looking forward to how we can cross-fertilize the information, the work programs, the projects, the focus, so that we're really making a global effort and having our global voice heard. Finally, one of the outputs of our session will be a message to the G20 leaders. And later on, we'll read the message, and I will deliver the message on our behalf to Secretary General Ban Ki-moon at the start of the G20, and he will further deliver it to the G20 leaders. Thank you very much. Now it's my enormous pleasure and honor to introduce Ambassador Rende, who is your ambassador to the OECD. And we're really honored that you're here, Ambassador. And since also the OECD is so centrally involved in these issues, I'm sure you're going to bring some news from there as well. But we're delighted that you are here to honor us at the meeting and participate in the discussion. I'd like to call on you next.
Sayın Rektör Yardımcısı Lale Hanım, çok değerli hocalarımız, özel sektörün, sivil toplum kuruluşlarının ve basın ve medyanın saygın temsilcileri, hepinizi saygıyla selamlıyorum ve burada Boğaziçi Üniversitesi'nde olmaktan duyduğum memnuniyeti ifade etmek istiyorum. Bu fırsatı bana sağlayan tüm Boğaziçi Üniversitesi mensuplarına içten teşekkürlerimi sunuyorum. Ben konuşmamı İngilizce hazırladım. Beni mazur görün. Tercümanlara da teşekkür ediyorum peşinen. Yavaş okumaya çalışacağım. Dolayısıyla umarım bir sorun olmaz. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, it's a privilege for me to have the opportunity to address such a distinguished audience. I would like to thank the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network Turkey, its honorary chair, Professor Üstün Ergüder, and Associate Professor Cemal Arıkan, President of the Executive Board, as well as our host today, Professor Gülay Barbarosoğlu, in her absence. Thank you so much for having this very important event, a timely event, just ahead of two major summits, international summits, namely the G20 Leaders Summit in Antalya and COP21, the Conference of the Parties in Paris. I also extend my sincere thanks to the distinguished moderator of this panel, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, for his momentous contributions in the adoption process of the SDGs and the 2030 agenda in general. It's quite challenging to speak after Jeffrey Sachs. Thank you for a most comprehensive and stimulating presentation and speech. Let me start with a few remarks on the current economic and political challenges that the global economy and the international community is currently confronted with. Dear friends, the global economy has gone through an unprecedented economic crisis in 2008. The worst part may be over, but we are not out of the wood just yet. We are faced with slow growth, unemployment, low trade flows, rising inequalities, fall in investment, and an overall lack of trust and confidence in governments, international institutions, and markets. Recent geostrategic developments in the Middle East, in North Africa, the civil war in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and the turmoil in Ukraine are all relatively new developments which have serious repercussions on the global economy. Another major challenge of a regional and global magnitude is the irregular migration and the refugees crisis. The ongoing Syrian refugees crisis has far-reaching implications for Turkey and the international community as a whole. As a result, Turkey is now host to the world's largest Syrian community. Obviously, these challenges have direct bearing on the topic of sustainable development. Issues such as poverty, inequality, unemployment, poor education, climate change, scarcity of natural resources, environmental degradation, food insecurity, and lack of access to energy, water, and sanitation have negative implications for our societies. Dear friends, the economic crisis showed us how vulnerable and interdependent our economies are. We saw that the system lacked not only resilience, but also institutional capacity to accurately assess and address the root causes of the crisis. Plus, the crisis aggravated the already existing institutional problems faced by our economies and societies. Painful as this was for the world, this situation led us to seek new ways and approaches to creating a more inclusive and resilient economy where all segments of our societies are able to live in dignity. The adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, in September, 25th of September, at the UN General Assembly was a historic milestone in the quest to achieve this goal. The 2030 Agenda, including the SDGs, together with financing of development, provide a comprehensive and robust framework for a sustainable world. The Millennium Development Goals, the MDGs, helped to lift more than 1 billion people out of extreme poverty. And now the SDGs are designed to further MDGs in an ambitious manner. Alongside poverty eradication, food security and nutrition, health and education, access to energy for all, these people-centered and planet-sensitive 17 goals and 169 targets set a delicate balance between the economic, social, and environmental aspects of sustainable development. And now I would like to have a few remarks on the importance of access to energy for all, goal number 7, because I cover also the International Energy Agency, and I'm also a member of the governing board, and the new executive director, Fatih Birol, has just recently briefed all OECD ambassadors on the situation and the role of energy, not only regarding boosting growth, but also climate change. So let me just say a few words on access to energy for all and goal number 7. Dear friends and colleagues, energy is one of the engines of economic growth and the backbone of our economies. Therefore, energy security should remain with us on the international agenda for the decades to come. access to affordable and uninterrupted energy is essential for sustainable development. According to the International Energy Agency, as the world population increases, energy demand will continue to increase and to grow steadily at a pace of 1.6% until 2030, the deadline to meet the SDGs. In order to meet the growing demand, we must use the best available sources of energy in a clean, efficient, and sustainable manner. Against a backdrop of low oil prices, and you will recall that we experienced a steep drop in oil prices recently, we are faced with the challenge of reducing emissions while at the same time meeting growing global energy demand. In view of the fact that energy production and use also account for 2/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, 2/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions. It's not an easy task for us to do the two things, to meet the two objectives. I think we will need innovative technologies and increased investment to boost growth through the use of clean energy, namely renewables and other emission-free energy resources. To achieve multiple goals, there is a need to switch to low-carbon economic models, as it was alluded to by Professor Sachs. Although the demand growth for coal has slowed, its share in the global energy mix is still high, at 29%. The share of coal is 29%. This illustrates the magnitude of our task. The challenge ahead of us is how to introduce a low-carbon economic model without further slowing economic growth. And in order to switch to a low-carbon system, we need to invest $90 trillion globally, $90 trillion. In the latest World Energy Outlook, the International Energy Agency predicts that renewables will account for the largest share of growth in global energy demand. Nevertheless, it will take time and trillions of dollars, as we said, of investment for renewables to have the dominant share in the primary energy mix. We need to encourage renewables, but it's not that easy. Another point, the CO2 emissions stemming from the use of natural gas is half of such emissions from coal when burned for power generation. One of the ways to meet energy demand may be to replace coal-fired power plants by gas-fired power plants, but it could be only part of the solution, because natural gas is still an expensive commodity. It's an expensive resource and cannot compete with coal in terms of prices. I'm just trying to explain how difficult it is to switch to a low-carbon economy. Let's face it. But nuclear power can also help improve energy security. I know that nuclear is a controversial matter, and among you, some of you may be against the use of nuclear power generation. But it is important, and we should have it in our energy mix in the decades to come. And the important thing is, besides renewables, nuclear power can deliver the steady supply of baseload electricity. Baseload electricity, which is needed to power a modern economy. Renewables cannot provide the baseload. So it's very important to have, so we will have to continue to burn fossil fuels and use nuclear for the baseload energy. And dear friends and distinguished representative of the NGOs, especially, I would like now here to deal with climate change, SDG 13, and Professor Sachs said so many important things on this matter. I think maybe needless to say that climate change is one of the most pressing challenges of our time. And it is a global problem, and it requires global solutions. And this is why we have the process, the UNFCCC process. Representative of 196 countries will meet in Paris to conclude a comprehensive agreement which will be applicable to all countries. The aim of the agreement is to deal with the adverse effects of climate change and to keep the rise in global temperature below 2 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. The big task of the international community is to bring the negotiation process to a successful conclusion. Although COP21 is right around the corner, many contentious issues remain to be resolved. So the draft agreement, which was negotiated in Bonn recently, includes 2 basic elements. So we have 2 basic elements in the draft agreement. One is commitment to reduce emissions, and the other one is financing adaptation and mitigation in low-income developing countries, LIDCs, we call them, and small island states. It is encouraging that so far 156 countries have declared their intended nationally determined contributions, the INDCs, to reduce emissions. INDCs are designed to enable all countries, developed and developing, to contribute to global efforts on combating climate change. However, not all INDCs are ambitious. In addition, some of the commitments made may not be measurable or verifiable. According to recent analysis, the commitments made to date would lead to 2.7 degrees increase in global temperature by the end of the century. So instead of 2, according to the commitments made, it will lead to 2.7. So it's not enough, we have to do more. Yet there is still reason for optimism. Prospects for an agreement have improved, especially after the US-China declaration on March 2014, in which the 2 countries expressed their intention to reduce emissions. And also we have the recent French-China declaration. And the third positive development, I believe, is the pledge of $2 billion to the Green Climate Fund. It's also important. It's not enough, but it's an important pledge. So I would like also to highlight one more point, and that is the African countries. 90% of the African countries made commitments, 2/3 of the Europeans and 1/3 of the Middle East and North African countries. So we should encourage those who have not yet made pledges, those countries. And I hope that they will do so before COP21 in Paris. The role of private sector is very important, and I hope that the private sector will do its part to fight this global challenge. Also, I was the chief climate change negotiator between Copenhagen up to Doha, and I must admit that trust and confidence among the parties is so important. So before Paris and during the Paris negotiations, we should work hard all together to establish trust and confidence among parties, and that we should not leave free riders. Nobody should be left behind. Everybody should assume responsibility. The G20 Turkish presidency is working with other G20 members to send a strong political message from the Leaders' Summit in Antalya to support the negotiation process. On the 17th and 18th of November, very soon, we will have the energy ministers, the International Energy Agency energy ministers meeting in Paris, under the chairmanship of Mr. Moniz, the US Secretary for Energy. And there also we are working on a statement to also support the climate change negotiations in Paris. Maybe a few words about what the OECD is doing. Mr. Sachs, would you like to hear a few things about the OECD? Yesterday we had a meeting, an extraordinary council meeting at the OECD with the participation of Secretary General Gurria and the G20, OECD G20 Sherpa Gabriela Ramos. And we briefed the Council on the G20, the outcome of G20 Leaders Summit, and about the role of the OECD in preparing also the summit. OECD is one of the cuisines of G20. G20 has no secretariat, so they work closely with the OECD. They work also with the IMF and World Bank and other international organizations. Especially the presidency works closely with them. And the OECD has done a tremendous work and job in preparing for the summit. But we were told yesterday by the Secretary General that the OECD has the capacity and knowledge, expertise to contribute to the implementation of the SDGs also. We have started in 2012, during our presidency of the Council, OECD Council, a project called New Approaches to Economic Challenges, NAEC. It is an initiative, an innovative project to better understand and meet the multiple challenges we face. NAEC was initially launched with a view to dealing with the root causes of the crisis and to formulate new policies, to provide a better policy advice for the international community so that we could prevent future economic crisis. So NAEC is an important project. We have also, in the support of the SDGs, we have developed policy framework for investment, and 30 countries are enjoying this service. And then also the GVCs, global value chains. The SDGs promise to leave no one behind, as we said. So the OECD framework for measuring well-being and progress is another tool we believe that we can support, as measuring well-being and progress goes beyond GDP growth. Beyond GDP growth does not suffice anymore to measure well-being. We started a new project which is Inclusive Growth and Green Growth Initiative. They're both aiming at introducing a new development and growth paradigm, a growth model. And the OECD's recent study, Aligning Policies for Low Carbon Economy, is another project. It's also helping developing countries to deliver on climate commitments. I will also say a few words about the role of education, but let me turn to Turkey and the implementation of the SDGs. And here, of course, you might just hear a statement from a Turkish diplomat, because our principle, one of our principles, is to help secure in our foreign policy a peaceful, prosperous, stable, and cooperative environment which is conducive to human development. This is one of the principles of Turkey's foreign policy. And during our presidency, we have placed development at the center of our agenda. Turkey's primary focus has been to fight inequality and achieve inclusive growth by embracing the poor and vulnerable groups and enhancing the integration of developing and low-income countries into the world economy. We emphasize the link between growth and investment. A particular focus was given to investment in quality infrastructure, which I believe is vital for the sustainable and strong growth of low-income developing countries. We recently hosted COP12 of the UN Convention on Combating Desertification in Istanbul. The conference focused on the implementation of the SDG Goal 15, which envisages the protection, restoration, and promotion of sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. This goal is also critical for food security and climate change. In conformity, it's comforting that the 2030 agenda incorporates international migration as a reality of major relevance, which could contribute to sustainable development of countries of origin and destination. And the World Humanitarian Summit to be held in Istanbul next year will provide, we believe, a unique opportunity to address this issue in a comprehensive manner. Sözlerime son vermeden önce, with your permission, may I switch to Turkish, Mr. Professor? Yes. Professor Sachs. Eğitimin önemine değinmek istiyorum. Değerli katılımcılar, 21 Ekim günü OECD merkezinde Türkiye daimi temsilciliği olarak eğitimin kalkınma ve büyüme açısından rolünü inceleyen, irdeleyen bir çalıştay düzenledik. Bu çalıştaya Türkiye'den akademisyenler katıldı. OECD'nin eğitim direktörü katıldı. OECD'nin eğitimden sorumlu genel sekreter yardımcısı iştirak etti, konuşmalar yaptılar. Microsoft'u davet ettik. Ayrıca dünya çapında eğitim alanında ön plana çıkmış STK'ları ve eğitim kurumlarının temsilcilerini, 300 bin öğrencisi olan bir kurumun CEO'sunu davet ettik ve eğitimin önemini çok ayrıntılı şekilde tartıştık. Gerçekten OECD, değerli katılımcılar, o eğitime çok önem veriyoruz. Eğitim direktörlüğü çok büyük bir direktörlük. PISA sonuçları hepinizin malumu. Bu çalıştayda özellikle gene OECD'deki çalışmalar kapsamında eğitimden beceriye, beceriden inovasyon, inovasyondan teknoloji üretimi, teknolojiden yararlanarak sanayide ve hizmet sektöründe daha iyi bir verimlilik, productivity, daha iyi bir verimlilik sağlamak ve oradan yüksek teknoloji ürün, yüksek teknoloji hizmet ve buradan hızlı büyüme, istediğimiz sürdürülebilir kalkınma. Yani böyle bir çizgide eğitimi çalıştık. Bu arada eğitimde eşitlik ve kaliteli eğitim, quality education, bunlar ön plana çıktı. Bu eğitimde eşitlik çok önemli. Fakat maalesef dünya düzeyinde henüz bu gerçekleştirilmiş değil. Bunun önemi üzerinde durduk. Eğitim, neden kaliteli eğitim? Çünkü gene OECD verilerine göre şu anda dünyada küresel düzeyde 500 milyon öğrenci başarısız okullarda eğitimine devam ediyor. 500 milyon öğrenci. Bunun da ekonomik açıdan sonuçları malumunuz. Bu çerçevede öğretmenlerin eğitilmesi ön plana çıktı. Öğretmenlerin eğitimi özellikle gelişmekte olan ülkelerde fevkalade önemli. Öğretmenlerin motivasyonu üzerinde duruldu. Motivasyon eksikliğinden söz edildi. Bunun da geliştirilmesi lazım. Eskiden çok gurur duyulan bir meslekken öğretmenliğin son zamanlarda özellikle bazı ülkelerde değerini ve önemini yitirdiği söylendi. Teknoloji kullanımı üzerinde duruldu eğitimde. Teknolojiyi hangi düzeyde teknoloji kullanmalıyız? Teknoloji evet, fakat yalnız teknoloji yeterli değil dendi. Gene nitelikli hoca, teknoloji, iyi bir ortam, öğrencilerin özendirilmesi, bunların hepsi eğitimin, iyi eğitim ve sürdürülebilir kalkınmanın gerekleri olarak ortaya kondu. Bence ne kadar eğitim üzerinde durursak, bizim gibi ülkeler açısından da fevkalade önemli diye düşünüyorum. ABD Büyükelçisi'nin bir konuşmasına şahit olduk. Dedi ki bu beceri yetersizliği nedeniyle Amerika Birleşik Devletleri'nde 2040 yılında eğer gerekli önlemler alınmazsa bu sahada 46 milyon az becerili kişi işini yeni nesil makinelere devredecek, kaptıracak. Yani sadece ABD ekonomisinde 2040 yılına kadar 46 milyon kişi işini kaybetme tehlikesiyle karşı karşıya kalacak. Bu nedenle bu sözlerle bitirmek istiyorum izin verirseniz ama haliyle buradayız. Sorularınız olursa yanıt vermeye çalışacağım büyük bir memnuniyetle. Beni sabırla dinlediğiniz için tekrar içten teşekkürlerimi sunuyorum. Sağ olun.
Ambassador, thank you very much for covering all of the important topics and reminding us also Turkey is so much in the center of these issues with the G20 hosting the Conference of the Parties of the Desertification Convention, and then the World Humanitarian Summit, the 23-24 of May next year, is crucial, especially given the humanitarian disaster that we have in the region. I think a lot of attention and eyes will be on this process, so we're really grateful for that report. Now I'm delighted to ask our colleague Aromar Revi, who heads the program on urban sustainability for the SDSN, the thematic network on urban sustainability, and has played a very key leadership role globally in getting SDG 11 into the list, because the question was, would there be a goal for urban sustainability? And Aromar said, yes, there would, back in 2012, and he proved it by August 2015. So I'm sure he's going to be talking about that theme. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jeff. Ambassador, professors, ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be back in this city, one of my favorite cities in the world, and in this wonderful room. It's quite an honor to be back here twice in 1 year. I'm going to, because I guess we're running short of time, I'm going to focus on, let's say, 3, maybe 4 rhetorical questions. And this comes from a conversation we had yesterday with Turkish colleagues on the SDGs and whether they really are very useful and they're implementable. So I guess the first question is, are the SDGs really important in the face of the multiple challenges that we face, whether it's the G20 or within Turkey itself? The second is, are they actually implementable? Because that's, you can have goals, but if you can't implement them, it's not very nice. And then if you could implement them, how would you actually go about doing it? And nobody's ever done them before, so, this is going to be an exercise in trying to figure that through. And finally, are there any hidden Achilles heels? Are there any unfinished agendas in this process that can trip ourselves up? So that's the sort of line of argument that I'm going to take. So I guess, if you talk to ordinary people on the street, if I pick up on the conversation we had yesterday afternoon, very, very few people actually know about the SDGs. Even though the SDGs, the process of building the SDGs, and one of our co-chairs has actually led this process in the UN, has been much more bottom-up than top-down. The MDGs, at least part of the criticism of the MDGs, in spite of the wonderful things that they've done, was that they were largely top-down. The SDG process has involved a lot of consultation. A few million people were involved in that process. But when you come to Turkey, and you come to many other parts of the world, including my country in India, most people actually haven't heard about this. Some people in government have heard about it. Some prime ministers and foreign ministers and delegations in New York have got very excited. But the question really is it really important in the face of, like we heard from the ambassador, of serious economic crisis in many parts of the world, and even China is starting to slow down and have trouble. Security crisis in many areas, and Turkey is sort of the epicenter of a whole range of these questions. And of course, social conflict. And if you look at how people behave, in the way they sort of elect their governments, in the way that governments actually run themselves, in some senses, the Sustainable Development Agenda may be something that's nice, but is it something that people really care about? And I think part of the answer to that question is if you look deeper beyond just the symptoms, and I would call forced migration, the millions of people that we're seeing coming through Turkey and maybe trying to make their way to Europe, if you look at the root causes, I would suspect, and you go back to the root causes, you would find at least 3 or 4 of these unfinished goals as being the root causes. Whether it is the drought in Turkey in some cases, or a whole range of other challenges in other parts of the world, the root causes lie actually in this agenda. So I think this agenda is really important because after 1948 and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, this is the first time that all the member states, it's quite exceptional, have come together around a political agreement which recognizes our interdependence, not only regions within a country and countries within a larger region like Europe or North Africa or whatever it is, but globally, and that's maybe a product of globalization, but more important, our interdependence with the natural environment actually supports us. And that's where, if you look at climate change, I'm a climate scientist, I'm one of the the lead authors on the last IPCC assessment. The climate problem that we see is a symptom. The disease lies somewhere else. It lies in, an overconsumption of carbon. Some people actually call it a carbon addiction. It deals with overconsumption, a whole range of other processes. And unless we address those fundamental processes which are embedded in these goals, we're not going to get very far, and we'll keep discussing the same questions again and again and again. So interdependence, I guess, is the most important thing. But what does it really mean? And this is a discussion, many of us have been involved in the negotiations in the process here. And I still remember the moment in the open working group when the co-chairs actually laid out very clearly, this is a very interesting moment. This is a moment where we are trying to set out a social compact. The SDGs, in some senses, are a multi-level social compact. And why do I say they are a social compact? First, because they're not enforceable. They're not enforceable in international law. They're not enforceable in most countries. So, they're a compact, but they're sort of socially agreed. The second thing is, unfortunately, because maybe Addis didn't work so well, at the current moment at least, they're not funded. They're not extensively funded at least. We hope that will change, because unless you fund them, nothing's going to happen. So this is an agreement that has been reached at least globally at the apex level between 193 countries, a club, so to speak, the United Nations, which has agreed on that process. However, many of the things that you see here, the challenges that we've seen or the opportunities in Latin America, in North Africa, in some cases in the Middle East, and I guess in your own country, are citizens of the world saying, look, these are the minimum conditions that we require. Our national governments, the firms that create the value addition in some cases, and a whole range of other frameworks to deliver to us. And that's really important to understand. And I think the opportunity for us is really to build the connection between the social compact at the local level, in the city of Istanbul, in parts of Istanbul, on this side or the other side, in the regions that we live in, and of course at national level, because they're all tied together. The implementation of this process cannot work unless that social compact is realized at these multiple levels. And that's why it is so interesting and challenging, because implementation means that we really have to do bottom-up and top-down at the same time, and this has never been done before, anywhere in the world. This is the first time we're doing it, and we're doing it with a large number of people and a large number of countries, which means there will be disagreement, convergence will be difficult, and there will be a whole range of processes that we have to learn. So that's the first thing. And then, of course, the leaders of the world have gone on and done something quite exceptional. They have set out a universal agenda. Yeah? This is a universal agenda. And not only a universal agenda, they've made life even more difficult for themselves by committing to a universal agenda in which nobody is left behind. So we know that to make a change which involves 90% of our population, or of an ecosystem, or whatever, or even for an ecosystem as far as economic development is concerned, is easy. But to actually commit to a process in which nobody is left behind, in real terms, is actually quite difficult. So at global scale, of course, this is frightening. When I look at the numbers as far as cities are concerned, we've made a commitment to provide 600 million new jobs across the world. We've made a commitment in some senses to move, maybe depending on how the numbers look like, maybe at least 500 million people out of abject or extreme poverty in urban areas. We made a commitment to provide universal health care and education to 5 billion people who will live in cities in 2030. These are the commitments we made at a global level. And of course, as you break them down and move them to country, and then, as Christian has done very interestingly, and down then to province and down to the city or the town that you're working in, you will find that these commitments are quite serious. They imply a whole range of processes which we don't actually have and bring into place. And on top of that, we've said we will put the most vulnerable, the most difficult challenges first. So this is something pretty serious, and I don't think, again, having seen these conversations and seen what happens in Security Council and in this process, I think the national governments at least are quite serious. The question is, can this actually be can this actually be implemented? When it comes to implementation, people have a whole range of questions. The most obvious question is, this is too complex. There are too many goals, too many targets. We can't understand this stuff. It'll never get done because it's too complicated. Now, the reason that it's complex is not only the negotiation between member states and the fact that the world is very complex and different countries and different regions come from different points of view on these questions, but also these are systemic questions that we're trying to address. So the opportunity here is not to take all of these goals in silos and do them one at a time, but to look at the synergy between them. So when we look at the urban goal, which is sort of goal 11 here, we don't only look at questions of transportation and land use and housing and stuff like that, which are embedded in that goal. We also look at 11 other goals, because you cannot have urban sustainability without having food security in rural areas. You cannot have urban sustainability unless you have the goal to do with water, the goal to do with energy actually dealt with. So there's an interconnection, which means that if you're able to get into that network, the synergies that play between them are going to give you the advantages. The challenge is that neither our governments and very often our firms, and in some cases universities, are not aligned to thinking in this way. We're not aligned to thinking systemically. And this is going to be the really big challenge for us, to actually step forward, reimagine how these things are connected, and get into trying to implement them. The second question, of course, is most of these things, because some people see this as a green agenda, it's bringing in environmental concerns into economic development and maybe social development, as something that are very far away. Climate change is something that may happen in the next 20 or 30 years. Why should I be bothered about it? Number one. Number two, if I'm a politician, I have to be re-elected every 3 to 5 years. These things don't make much sense to me. And of course, if I'm a CEO of a company, I'm worried about next year's profit. Why should I be concerned about these long-term questions? Actually, if you drill down and look at the target framework and the big debate that we're having at indicators, it is actually much more tangible and real. About a third of these targets we're talking about are focused and can only be delivered by local governments and local action, which means if we are focused on local action and local governance and a whole range of other processes, these are very tangible questions. You can measure them, like, for example, what is the level of maternal mortality on some things in our country? That's a big issue. What is the quality of education that you have, etc., etc. What is the quality of energy that you have in your system? I mean, Turkey has many challenges in terms of its highly carbon-intensive path of development that seems to be set out, including in the INDCs that one has seen coming into Paris. So these are very concrete local questions that can be addressed locally, and if you have the right orientation and you've built the right mobilization, they actually become political questions. Because if people in an area, today, most countries have people who are quite well educated, they can access the internet, they find that their government has committed themselves to a certain path of development, and they've done it at the highest level in the world, it becomes a little bit more difficult if you're able to build the pathways that connect the local to the regional to the global. So I think one of our big challenges is to build these small steps and build up this process as far as that's concerned. So the question then is, okay, fair enough. Some of these things can be implemented in the short or medium run, and locally they become very tangible. How does one think about going about implementation? And we've been having conversations about this for the last 8 to 9 months with colleagues in Turkey, and I've been doing this across much of the world with city mayors and a whole range of other people. How would you think about this process? I would say we have a very interesting moment now over the next year and a half. Some of us are saying, let's rush into this process, let's go and show that it can be done. There's a value in doing that, because one of the challenges with large global agreements is people, something new will come up, it will be forgotten, etc., etc. So there is a value in action, there's a value in implementation. But I would caution that maybe we have to step back and think a bit. And the reason I would say that is, many of these conversations have rarely happened before. I've seen that in one's engagement in Turkey. So the first thing, and the most important thing, and that I would say certainly to the academics and educators in the room, is really a question of opening up the conversations between the multiple silos that the SDGs try and break down. The linkage between health and transportation systems in cities, for example. We know that as we move to greater motorization, cardiovascular disease and lifestyle disease are problems that sort of affect all of us. So when we talk about livable cities, places where people can actually walk, and Bangalore and where I live and some parts of Istanbul have something in common. The footpaths are not very easy to walk on, fine. So even if you want to walk, you can't walk on them. If you're actually able to replan the city so that many areas don't require 2 hours to go from one to the other, and this is common between Bangalore and Istanbul in some senses, it actually changes the relationship between the health goal and the urban goal. So we have to look at those connections. So the first thing is, to my mind, opening up conversations between people who normally don't talk to each other, between the private sector and government, between government and academia, between civil society and everybody else. That's a difficult thing to do. And from what we've done in the last 2 years on cities, we know that it can be done. It can be done globally, which means that it certainly can be done within countries. The second thing is education. Education is absolutely central, because we have to prepare people, especially young people, to take on, in the next 15 and more years, these processes. And we actually don't have the answers to many of these questions. So we have to educate them to be able to engage with these questions, set up institutions, involve themselves in processes to find the solutions to these problems in a systemic manner. And finally, in that process, this is, I would say, the first step, you have to mobilize the key actors and the stakeholders to act on what they know that's important in their own interests. Because if they don't act in their own interests, I think this thing is actually not going to work. So you have to work along with the interests of the private sector, you've got to work with the interests of government at various levels, you've got to work with the interest of academia, you've got to work with the interest of all these actors. And when that process actually starts happening, then you have a creative way forward. So I'm saying conversations, education and mobilization go together. They're actually the base of this process, because if people don't actually push this thing, it's going to be something floating in the air that certain actors will maybe do and maybe not do. That's the first step. The second step, and Christian has given us a very interesting example of that, is to critically assess your readiness in this game. And I think it's very interesting because if you look at the countries which have very high GDP per capita in some senses, you find that in actual fact, you look at that polar diagram inside that document, many of them are in deep trouble. And we've known that for a long time. I mean, we don't speak about it very openly, but there's objective evidence that many countries are in deep trouble. Some of the largest economies in the world are in deep trouble along these multiple dimensions. Now, if we were to take that and drill down from country level, down to regions and down to cities, and we started to do this within SDSN, you would find there are similar sets of challenges. And I think that is the next big process for us, to try and assess readiness and our status on these questions. Now, it's easier in some parts of the world that some of us come from the global south, because the MDGs in some senses have set some of this frame. But the MDGs do not address all the questions that are dealt with here. So I would say assessing readiness very critically is important. And in this, it means a partnership between government, between the private sector, and critically, civil society and academics who are able to look at this question quite critically. Once you've assessed the readiness, to my mind, this is a technical readiness that we've dealt with on where we're getting and how the system is going. You also have to be, and this is a difficult part, you have to assess the political readiness to move on these questions, the cultural readiness of, not all cultures are ready to deal with all questions. Questions of economic growth may not be possible to discuss in some cultures, because they sort of, cultures have religion about that. Economic growth is absolutely essential. If you want to deal with consumption questions, they're not on the agenda. People will not be willing to talk about this. If you remember, there was a famous US president who said, read my lips in the 1990s, and talked about a certain country, that their lifestyle not being up for challenge. So political readiness is very important. Cultural readiness is very important. And of course, because many of these questions deal with inequality, social readiness, to address questions around gender, a whole range of other inequalities and asymmetry are difficult. And we found that in the global negotiations. So that's the second step, assessing readiness and doing it not only on the technical counts that we see in these wonderful documents, but also in terms of the hard questions, the social, cultural, and political questions. The next step, and Jeff laid that out very, very quickly, is to try and see how we can align the national planning processes, where you have planning processes, so national policies with this. Again, SDSN is starting to do some very interesting work in this area. We actually have a sort of national handbook that's being put together, which will help national governments to try and look at this question and assess it around these multiple dimensions. Because, for the last 200 years or so, national governments and even regional governments have been working in a siloed manner. The question here is, how can you build the synergies between these different silos? What is the relationship between economic development and labor conditions and social protection, for example, something that's of great concern to us. But you cannot stop at national level, which is the mistake in some senses, or let's say the chimera that many national governments or processes will sort of leave you with. You have to take it to the level at which implementation will actually take place, which is local and regional governments, at least in many parts of the world. In some cases, like in a country like Singapore, or Dubai, or whatever, it is the national government and the local government are one and the same. But in larger countries, more diverse countries like ours, you will require to actually drill this down. And there you will find a significant challenge of institutional capacity, of education, and of resources. And as you try and align this process, and it will be an iterative process. Remember, in this 15 years, I would imagine in many parts of the world, it will take 5 or 7 years for this iteration to take place between national and regional and local plans to make it happen. Because if you don't get down to the nitty-gritty detail of how do I get a particular school to have an adequate gender ratio or something like that, the process will actually not change. Now, one of the important things that many of us in the room will play is actually to set up the monitoring systems which help us understand where we are, where we want to go to, and how fast we're getting there. And this is quite important. In a goal-based framework, the idea is not to get to the second decimal point of the goal or the target or even the indicator. The idea is to redirect the system to work in a certain direction. And we know that redirection only happens when you have something that is tangible and you're measuring how far you are in that direction. And if that process of measurement is actually embedded between social, political, and other innovations, then you start finding over a period of time, because these are very complex systems, I work with cities which are very difficult to turn around, the system will hopefully start moving in the right direction. It may not go to the precise compass point that you want to, but as long as it goes into the right quadrant, I would say we're not doing too badly. So setting up the monitoring and evaluation systems are very important. Today we have, in some senses, what we call the data revolution. There are a whole range of questions, and I'll give you a concrete example from Istanbul. Colleagues yesterday were saying that for the first time, Turkey has put out data on land use and land cover change, which compares 1990 with 2000 and 2007. And it makes a huge difference when we're looking at environmental impact, how we lay large infrastructure, and a whole range of things like that. And they were encouraging people from India, like us, to help provide the software on open source platforms to make it available. Now, if what the UN and many of us are trying to do succeeds on the data revolution, every country in the world, every community will have access to information, maybe on a weekly basis, on how things are changing in their environment, because satellite data will become publicly available, they become freely available like Google has around many of these questions. Similarly, environmental and other sort of standard data that will be available to us will allow us, wherever we are, to start questioning how far we're going. So that's the next step. And finally, once you have these in place, you cannot forget action. And we know, because this is the first time that we're doing all of this, there are going to be lots of failures. There's no other way of doing this. There will be failures because that's the only way that we learn. These are complex, wicked problems. So you have to set up large numbers of small pilots, usually embedded at the local level, test them out to learn, because this is a process of social learning. As I said, it's a social compact, but it's also a process of social learning. You have to set up these processes and test them out. And obviously, where will you start from? You'll start from what you're currently doing. You'll start from current development programs. You'll start from current economic development processes. You'll start with current movements dealing with social questions. You'll start from there. But as you start from there and start looking at this framework, you will see new opportunities to connect, gender with climate, to connect inequality with water. You'll start seeing these synergies actually working with each other. And if you have enough pilots working in an environment, it doesn't matter where it starts from the private sector, from government, from local government, or whatever it is, I hope in 3 to 5 years, we will start seeing some synergies between them, and then the process of mobilization and change will actually happen. And in that, of course, there are 3 critical things which we have a real problem with. There is no money at the moment in most places, which means that we have to work actively to redirect resources into the kind of things that we require. The second thing is, many of the technologies that we have are not adapted to this kind of integrated thinking. So there will be a lot of innovation that will be required on the technical side, on the business side, to adapt these processes, whether it's IT, which is the most obvious things, but even energy technologies. We are talking about a world in which decentralized energy production is going to be the norm rather than than the exception, and in which storage technologies will have to be very critical in making this possible. How will that actually work? We don't have examples in every part of the world. Some parts of the world will actually give us a way of looking at that process. And finally, it is all about people. It's about redirecting the institutions to be able to orient themselves around making this kind of process, which we've agreed at the highest level in the world, and of course, hopefully at lower levels, to make it possible. The institutional change is going to be really hard, because it is in that things will have a longer term direction. And for that institutional change, obviously the most critical thing for us is education. And that brings us back to the core role of SDSN, the reason why we're starting with MOOCs, etc. If we don't work on critical education, I don't think we will see too much progress, at least in the early phase of this 2015-2030 process. And if that happens, then the governance systems, the regulatory mechanisms, etc., will start reorienting themselves. Why? Because people like us in the room will start doing that in our everyday lives. We believe in what we're doing. The system allows us to create those processes. So thank you very much.
Let's thank all of the panel. Thank you very much for giving us a complicated homework assignment for the next 15 years. Very complicated, but very accurate assessment of how big the changes that we need and are contemplated, in fact, are. We've come to the end of the session, and I think we've used our time generously, but it was important to get the starting point in place, and we have that. And thank you all to our excellent panel. Thank you very much.
Efendim, panelistlerimize teşekkür ediyoruz. Kısa bir kahve arası vereceğiz. Kahve arasından sonra ikinci panelimizde tekrar görüşeceğiz.